It began with silence, the kind of silence that feels deliberate, not the peaceful hush of dawn or the reverent quiet of prayer, but a charged, waiting silence, like the breath before a scream. Deep within the stone belly of the convent, in a chapel barely lit by flickering candles, a statue of the Virgin Mary stood alone, or so they thought. For years the sisters passed her by with bowed heads and whispered hymns. None dared look directly into her eyes. There was something about the way the light never fully touched her face, how the shadows seemed to cling to her lips like they were listening or moving. Welcome to Convent Nightmares, where we unearth the forgotten, forbidden, and unholy stories buried within the walls of the sacred. This tale is not for the faint of heart. If you're new here, subscribe for more horrifying confessions from cloistered corridors. Leave a like to keep the candles burning, and comment your city and country below, so the shadows know where you sleep tonight. The convent in this story still stands. Its bells still toll, though no one pulls the rope. The air around it smells faintly of roses and rust, and the birds refuse to perch on its roof. The locals speak of one sister in particular, Sister Amara, who spent too long in front of that Virgin statue. They say she began to whisper secrets, then started laughing at Mass. They say she changed, but most of all, they say she listened. Because that statue, it spoke back. And now, dear listener, I ask only one thing. Keep your eyes open, and never pray to something that can hear you breathe. You're about to hear what happens when divinity listens too closely. Sister Amara arrived at the convent under a sky of ash-colored clouds. She was not like the other novices, quiet, obedient, and pale with fear. No, Amara was different. Her faith wasn't meek. It was burning, almost defiant, like she was daring God to notice her. Her eyes held a storm that made even the Mother Superior pause. No one asked why she had chosen this place, a crumbling convent on the edge of forgotten hills. No one asked what she left behind. In convents, silence is part of the vow. She spent her first weeks in complete devotion, kneeling longer than the rest, praying when the others slept, fasting until her lips cracked and her knees gave way. The others noticed, but they dared not speak of it. In that cloistered world, excess piety was not holy, it was dangerous. And yet there was something else that set Amara apart. She gravitated toward the small chapel on the eastern wing, the one few entered. That was where the statue stood. The statue was older than the convent itself. No records told who carved it or how it came to be there. It was different from other images of the Virgin. Her eyes were cast downward, yes, but not in meekness. There was weight in her gaze, something that pulled at the soul, that made you feel exposed. Her hands, too, were not gently outstretched in blessing. One hand was held slightly back, as if keeping a secret, as if hiding something in the folds of stone. It was there that Amara began to spend her hours, at first in prayer, then simply sitting, watching, listening, and then speaking. She whispered things only the Virgin could hear. Confessions, questions, doubts. Her lips moved with the fervor of one unburdening a soul to something that would never answer. But the trouble was, it did. One night, Sister Lucille walked past the chapel after midnight. She froze when she heard murmuring, low and rhythmic, not like a prayer, like a conversation. She crept closer, careful not to let her rosary beads click. Inside, Amara sat motionless, her eyes wide open, her face inches from the statue's face. Her lips were not moving, but the murmuring continued. Lucille fled, convinced the devil had found a tongue. By the following week, Sister Amara changed. She no longer took communion. She no longer knelt. Her eyes stayed fixed ahead in Mass, not on the crucifix, but on the statue that wasn't even there. And the silence around her grew heavy, not the peaceful kind, but the waiting kind again, the kind that watches. The other sisters began to feel it too. The candles near the statue burned colder. Wax formed patterns no one wanted to interpret. One sister found rose petals on the chapel floor, fresh, red, damp with something that wasn't dew. Another dreamt of a voice reciting psalms backward in her ear, always stopping at the same line, "Do not hide your face from me." And then there was the smell. Sweet like incense, rotten like decay, it clung to Amara's robes. The Mother Superior tried to intervene. She called Amara into her quarters, demanded to know what she was doing alone so often, why she ignored prayer times. Amara smiled. She said nothing, just smiled. It wasn't a smile of rebellion or defiance. It was knowing. As if she'd heard a joke no one else was supposed to understand. That same night, the statue was found turned slightly, facing the wall. But no one had moved it. The next morning, whispers floated through the convent like smoke. The statue had moved, they said. It had turned to face the wall, as though ashamed or perhaps afraid. But statues do not turn themselves, not centuries-old blocks of marble rooted deep in stone. Mother Superior ordered it returned to its proper position. It took 3 nuns and 2 novices to shift it back. Their fingers bled from the effort, as if the statue resisted them, as if it had grown roots in the floor overnight. Amara watched from the pews, hands folded, her gaze unblinking. She didn't help. She didn't speak. When the task was done and the sisters returned to their chores, she remained in that pew for hours, unmoving. It was said she didn't eat that day. It was also said that the statue, though turned back, no longer felt like the Virgin Mary. It felt like something wearing her shape. That night, the bell rang at the wrong hour. At precisely 3:13 a.m., when no one was scheduled to rise, the bell in the old tower let out a single peal, the kind that made hearts seize and rosaries clatter to the floor. It wasn't loud, it was wrong, the kind of sound that reverberates inside the bone. The sisters gathered, pale and shivering, in the hallway. No one had gone up. No one had touched the rope. The tower had been locked for decades.
Amara was not among them. They found her in the chapel again, kneeling at the base of the statue, hands clasped, lips bloodied. She looked up as they approached and said one thing. She rang it. She wants to speak to all of you. The sisters recoiled. Some ran. The older ones crossed themselves, whispering exorcism prayers under their breath. But the youngest, Sister Magdalene, stepped forward. "Who is she?" she asked. Amara turned her head slowly toward the statue. She said, "Not Mary, something older, something we forgot. She was worshipped long before the Madonna wore blue." Mother Superior ordered the chapel closed. Boards were nailed over the doorway, candles removed, the statue veiled in a shroud of black. But it was already too late. The convent was no longer silent. At night, soft humming came from behind the walls, hymns that no one remembered teaching, footsteps that echoed without a source, scratching beneath the floorboards that stopped whenever someone looked down. Amara was confined to her quarters, but she didn't resist. She sat by the window, smiling at the moon, her breath fogging the cold glass in shapes that looked almost like letters, letters from an alphabet no one knew. One morning her bed was found empty, the window open, but no footprints in the frost. 3 days later, she returned. She walked into the chapel, unboarded, untouched, as if it had never been sealed. She knelt before the statue and whispered something, and then she wept, real tears, painful tears, as though she had glimpsed something no mind was meant to carry. The sisters watched in stunned silence as Amara laid her head against the virgin stone feet. "She forgives you, but she won't forget." And with that, she fainted.
When Amara awoke, she was no longer herself. Her voice had changed, soft and heavy, like it carried the weight of centuries. Her eyes no longer searched the room, but pierced through it, as if seeing things layered over the world, invisible to the rest. The convent doctor checked her for signs of illness or delirium, but found only a low, steady heartbeat and a faint humming in her chest. When she breathed, the candles flickered, even those far from her bedside. Mother Superior called for the diocese. They would send someone to investigate, perhaps a priest trained in discernment or exorcism. But communication with the outside world had begun to falter. Letters returned unopened. The telephone lines, always temperamental, crackled with static or rang with no one on the other end. The world beyond the gates of the convent began to fade, like a dream being forgotten at dawn. Amara, meanwhile, began drawing. With charcoal on the walls of her cell, she sketched symbols none of the sisters recognized. Spirals inside triangles, eyes wrapped in vines, stars with too many points. She wrote words in languages they didn't teach in seminary. The drawings never smudged, never faded, as if the very walls accepted them as truth. Sister Magdalene tried to wipe them away once, only to collapse moments later with a nosebleed and blurred vision for hours. No one tried again. It was Sister Bernice who first noticed the chapel statue bleeding. A thin red trail wept from one of the eyes, At first they thought it was rust or candle wax, but it was too rich, too thick, too unmistakably human. Tests weren't necessary. Every nun in that place had tasted their own blood during penance or silence. They knew what it was, and they knew where it led. A trickle down to the altar, then vanishing between the stone tiles as though the earth itself drank it. After that, dreams plagued the sisters. Dreams of being buried alive, dreams of screaming mouths without faces, dreams of standing in the chapel, eyes wide open, while something unseen walked in circles around them, breathing their names. Many began refusing sleep. They prayed in shifts, clutching their rosaries like lifelines. But prayer no longer brought comfort. The familiar verses tasted bitter in their mouths, like mold on sacred bread. The more they prayed, the darker the silence afterward. Amara remained eerily calm. She said nothing more about her, but she began humming again, the same forgotten hymn that had no name, no origin. It echoed through the halls at night, never loud, never far, always just outside the ear's reach. One morning, a sister was found in the garden, her hands buried deep in the soil, her nails torn, her eyes wide open. She whispered, "She sings in the dirt," before falling into catatonia. The sisters began to turn on each other. Accusations flew. Who had brought the evil? Who had failed to confess? Who was secretly reading the forbidden texts stored in the locked archives? The unity of the convent dissolved into paranoia. They ate separately, slept with doors locked and crucifixes clutched. Some began writing notes instead of speaking, fearing their own voices might carry things not meant to be said. Sister Magdalene, still young in her vows, tried to be brave. She believed somehow that Amara could be saved, or that the darkness could be explained. She visited Amara's cell at night, prayed beside her, read her scripture, but Amara only smiled sadly. "She's not in the chapel anymore," she whispered once. "She's in the walls now, and she listens when you lie." The worst came when the statue moved again, not turned, moved. It now stood 3 feet to the left of its pedestal, though no one had entered the sealed chapel. The candles arranged around it were all lit, their wax pooled into words no one dared read aloud. And Amara, somehow, had gone missing again. The convent bells rang at dawn, though no one had pulled the rope. The sisters gathered in the chapel, drawn by the solemn, almost mechanical sound of the chimes. The air was sharp and cold, as if the walls themselves had exhaled during the night. Candles had burned to the end without being lit. The crucifix behind the altar had tilted slightly, no longer facing forward, but turned subtly toward the pews, like it was watching. Mother Superior ordered silence. They stood in prayer, but no one dared close their eyes. Then the voice came. It wasn't human, but it used a human shape. It echoed from the corners, layered like dozens of women speaking the same words with mismatched mouths. "She's still beneath," it hissed, "not buried deep enough." Sister Agnes screamed and fled the room, weeping uncontrollably. When they found her later, she was scraping the walls of her own cell, whispering,
I saw her smile beneath the stone. That morning, the floor tiles of the chapel began to lift. Not all at once, just one by one, slowly, as if the earth beneath was breathing. Beneath each tile they found nothing but blackness, no soil, no foundation, just darkness so thick it swallowed the candlelight whole. One sister dropped a rosary into the gap. It never made a sound. The space wasn't empty, it was waiting. By evening, Sister Magdalene discovered a hidden door. It was behind the storage room, concealed behind shelves no one had touched in years. A narrow wooden panel marked with the same symbols Amara had drawn. The wood was soft, damp to the touch, like it had been weeping. Against all warnings, she opened it. The corridor behind led downward into darkness, carved not by tools, but by something dragging itself through stone. She walked for minutes, hours, she couldn't tell. The air was thicker the deeper she went. The walls pulsed like veins. And then, finally, she reached a chamber, a crypt not marked by crosses or saints, but carvings of mouths open in eternal scream. In the center was a slab, and on it, Amara, alive, eyes open, skin pale as ash, lips moving, though no sound came. Magdalene stepped closer, heart racing. Amara looked at her, not with recognition, but with sorrow, as if Magdalene had made a terrible mistake. Then the air changed. A voice whispered behind her, "You opened the mouth," and the chamber shuddered. Amara began to bleed from her eyes. The slab cracked, and the floor beneath it split open, revealing hands, so many hands reaching up from below. Magdalene fled. She ran back through the tunnel, chased by the sound of hundreds of bare feet slapping against stone. When she burst into the chapel again, the others were already waiting. They knew. They had heard the same things, dreamed the same dreams. The time for prayers was over. The time for confessions had passed. Now it was just a matter of survival. The chapel doors slammed shut on their own. Windows darkened. Candles extinguished. And in the pulpit, standing where no one had stood in years, was Amara. But not Amara. Her face was a mask of calm grief. Her eyes were black, her habit soaked in red. She opened her mouth, and every bell in the convent rang at once, without wind, without hands. The sound wasn't noise, it was memory. It was every secret ever spoken in a whisper, played back all at once. The nuns collapsed. Some from fear, others from revelation. Those who had nothing to hide screamed loudest. Those who had held on to shame were pulled backward into the shadows, their mouths sealed shut by invisible hands. Sister Magdalene tried to reach the altar, to break the circle of symbols now glowing beneath the statue. But with each step, her feet sank deeper into the stone, like the floor was becoming water. When she finally looked back, Amara was gone. Only the echo of her lullaby remained, wrapping the chapel in a song no one wanted to hear. A hymn written in hunger, sung through centuries of silence.
The chapel remained sealed. No one dared open the doors again. The stained glass bled crimson light even at midnight. The bells rang only once per day, at the 13th hour, a time that shouldn't exist. It struck between seconds, splitting time like a knife through wet paper. And with every chime, a sister disappeared. Sister Magdalene had stopped speaking. She sat in the hallway outside the chapel, fingers stained black, eyes glazed. She scratched symbols into the wood floors using shards of broken candle holders. She was tracing memories, hers and those that were not hers. In her silence, she remembered what the voice had said. Not buried deep enough, not sealed with truth. The altar wasn't a grave, it was a door, and someone had left it ajar. Meanwhile, the remaining sisters began to hear the singing. At first faint, like humming behind walls, then clearer, echoing through the drains and fireplaces. A psalm none of them had ever learned, a melody twisted and reversed as if time itself recoiled from it. They tried to cover their ears, but it wasn't a sound of the ears. It bloomed inside the skull, like a seed of madness watered by fear. One night, Sister Beatrice saw the statue move. The Virgin's head turned toward her, eyes hollow, lips parting, not to speak, to inhale. As if drawing in her thoughts, her guilt, her sins. She fainted and awoke in her bed, covered in ash. Her pillow was gone, replaced with a single brick, heavy and warm, marked with Amara's name. They buried the brick in the garden, hoping it would end the visions. It didn't. That night, Sister Beatrice was found in the kitchen, boiling pages torn from the Bible. Sister Magdalene knew what needed to be done. She entered the chapel one last time, this time alone. She stepped over the blood-marked floor, ignored the shadows curling around the pews. She lit every candle, one by one, and placed them in a circle. She opened the altar. Inside, not a body, but a mirror. One that didn't reflect her face, but her secrets, her envy, her anger, her failure to save Amara. She wept. Not because she was afraid, but because she understood. This was never about one sister. It was about all of them. Their silence, their complicity. The darkness had fed on what they buried, not just in the ground, but in themselves. She stepped into the mirror, not physically, but with her will, her memory. She gave it the truth it hungered for. The candles exploded. Light filled the chapel, and then vanished. When the sisters opened the doors at sunrise, the chapel was empty. No candles, no blood, no Amara. Only silence. And on the altar, a new psalm written in red. He who seals his sins in stone shall meet them in the silence of prayer. The mouth of God is mercy, but the mouth beneath is always open. Sister Magdalene was never seen again, But every 13th hour her voice could be heard in the wind, soft, steady, singing the forbidden psalm backwards. The sisters began to change. They spoke only in whispers. They walked only in pairs. The convent became a place not of worship, but of containment, a vault for guilt, a prison for shadows. The world outside never knew. No one visited anymore. The road was covered in mist year-round. Birds avoided the sky above it. Children dared not speak its name. And deep within its stone heart, where no sunlight reached and no priest ever tread, the mirror still waited, hungry, patient, and wide awake.
So, if someday you find yourself near a chapel with no name, whose doors open without hinges, and whose candles burn without flame, do not enter, do not kneel, do not pray, because prayers whispered in cursed places don't rise to heaven. They fall, they sink, they are devoured. And if you hear a voice humming a psalm that twists your memory, makes your mouth dry and your heart slow, run, because that's not a song, it's a summons, a hunger in verse, and you were never meant to hear it unless something has already been listening to you. This has been another descent into the Vale of Shadows from Convent Nightmares. If you're still with us, with lights flickering and breath uneven, leave a like, subscribe for more stories that were never supposed to be told, and comment below your country and city so she knows where the echoes should travel next. And remember, silence is not always peace. Sometimes it's the sound of something waiting just behind the veil.